Open world games have always boasted rich and expansive worlds that were supposed to inspire exploration, but in recent years, I feel like open world games have become more about having a giant to-do list and checking off tasks one by one. It became less and less about traversing the world, and more about buying the corresponding map from a shop, or synchronizing with the right tower to ensure that I would see everything and anything of interest on the map. And once I would do that, I would then finish those side missions or find those collectibles in a systematic fashion. But The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild threw those conventions out the window and turned the focus back onto actual exploration. One of the main reasons it was able to accomplish that was thanks to its ingenious use of its map, and how the map deliberately withheld information from the player. Open up any map in a modern open world game, and I can almost guarantee that the map will be littered with an overwhelming number of icons and markers. People have come to expect a certain level of hours when it comes to open world games, and the easiest way for the developer to make sure that the player sees all of the content in the game is with markers on a map that show the player exactly where everything is. Once you do whatever the game's version of synchronizing with the tower is, the game will then barf out all of those icons onto that section of the map, and all of that information will now be made available for you at a moment's notice. Breath of the Wild also has towers of its own, but synchronizing with these towers doesn't reveal any specific locations on the map. All it does is show the topography of the region. The real use and benefit of climbing Zelda's towers is the physical act of getting to a higher vantage point. Once I reached the top of a tower, I would then peer out into the open world and mark points of interest myself with the binoculars. This may seem like a minor aspect in the grand scheme of things, but it made me feel like I had agency in the world, and that I was discovering the world myself. In that same vein, if I wasn't looking very carefully, or if the weather conditions weren't very favorable when I made it to the top of the tower, then it's entirely possible that I would have missed something that a more keen-eyed player would have spotted. I was finding things of my own volition, and not just letting the game automatically fill in the map for me. The lack of information on the map was so instrumental in how the game promoted exploration. Oftentimes in open world games, having a marker on a map dictate where I go meant that I was simply making a beeline towards the waypoint without observing my surroundings. After all, I know that everything worth seeking out has already been marked for me, so why even bother investigating anything else? But in Breath of the Wild, even when I had my next destination in mind, I was always looking out for different things that piqued my interest, and getting distracted as a result. I was mindful of the landscape around me, because there was always the allure of something worthwhile hiding away in some random corner of the world. And when my bouts of distraction did lead to a reward, finding that reward felt doubly satisfying, because it felt like I had found it on my own. It wasn't the game telling me where a collectible was through a map. It was me spotting something out of the ordinary and acting upon that drive to explore that led me to unearth something valuable as a result. I stumbled upon something organically, simply by traversing the world, rather than having the game lead me by the nose. With all that being said, this motivation and willingness to explore would all be for naught if the game's world wasn't fun to actually explore, or if the game didn't properly reward the player for their curiosity. Thankfully, Breath of the Wild succeeds on both fronts. The diversity of Zelda's open world always made it engaging to roam around in. There were cliffs, valleys, peaks, different degrees of elevation, different types of weather. It was a varied world that made each area feel distinct and unique. And being able to climb everything was vital in making the exploration feel truly limitless. Simply getting from point A to point B was sometimes a challenge in and of itself, as you're not just following a breadcrumb trail like in the Fable games. The feeling you get when you scale a massive, complex cliff to reach an area you feel like you shouldn't have been able to is simply fantastic. There were multiple times over the course of my playthrough when I said to myself, this is definitely not the way the game wanted me to get here. The simple fact that the game let me have this kind of feeling is incredible. It also felt like the world had something of value lying in every corner. There were Korok seeds aplenty in the most obscure of places, and going down a path you think goes on for way too long often led to a well-hidden shrine that wasn't visible from a tower. Going out of your way also at times led to a difficult boss monster, or a unique trial exclusive to that area. The game did a fantastic job at rewarding players who decided not to stick to the main road, and instead investigated something off the beaten path. In fact, Eventide Island, perhaps one of the coolest challenges in the game, is entirely possible for the player to miss. The game doesn't put a big exclamation mark over where it is, and it doesn't treat the island any differently than the other myriad landmasses in the world. But the trial the player is faced with on the island is wildly distinct compared to what the player encounters in the rest of the game. The reason I stumbled upon this island is because I saw something out in the middle of the ocean and just thought it would be a fun little thing to reach it. The game also constantly rewarding me for trying new things and discovering new locations was also a motivating factor, as I knew the game would have something noteworthy on such a faraway place. But what I found was a completely unexpected sequence of events, and it eventually turned out to be one of my favorite moments in the game. While games these days have leaned towards revealing more and more information to the player, Breath of the Wild's choice to withhold certain information was one of its smartest design decisions. The game's map facilitated exploration because it served merely as a guide, not as a crutch the player can lean on that would point out the location of every single point of interest. I felt compelled to uncover the game's immaculately designed world by actually running, climbing, and paragliding through its environments. And the game helped foster this penchant for exploration by providing a bevy of meaningful challenges and rewards throughout the world. As games reach a wider audience, it's obviously very important to offer a certain level of guidance and direction, especially as that wider audience might not be that familiar with the intricacies of a more complex video game. But Breath of the Wild showed that if the game presents an engaging world and gives the player the right set of tools, then the player's innate desire to explore will be enough on its own.